Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so happy to see so many people give up an important day of the week, a Saturday, to come to USC. I'm Karen Sims Gallagher. I'm Dean of the USC Rossier School of Education, and we're delighted to have you here today. I want to thank you for coming to campus. It's been a busy several days for us with commencement and all the excitement of 19,000 undergraduates, master's, and doctoral students graduating, and over close to 1,000 graduates in the Rossier School of Education. So this is an extension of the things that we believe in the Rossier School, and I want to thank, some of you have been here since breakfast this morning, and this has really been the second meeting of the LA Educational Exchange. And for those of you who don't know about that exchange, the exchange is a new project from our Center for Engagement-Driven Global Education, which is better known as Project EDGE, led by Alan Arkatoff, who's a professor in our Rossier School. The project was born out of a dual sense of responsibility and privilege we experience as a leading research university situated within the second largest school system in the country. Early today, we brought together a small working group of really very passionate advocates and decision makers from the education, entertainment, and policy spaces. I thought it was a very productive discussion, small groups listening to panels. And it really was about the ways storytelling can affect social change. I am so pleased to be able to continue the discussion with Sal Khan. Sal Khan was our commencement speaker yesterday afternoon. Very engaging, and Sal, I heard lots of comments. Students stopped me, graduates stopped me to tell us how great it was, and I know it's going to continue on this afternoon. Alan is going to give Sal a full introduction, but I want to thank you, Sal, for coming here and being with us yesterday and today. Now I'd like to introduce Alan Arkatoff, and Alan is the founding director of Project EDGE. He's also the, I got to get it all right, Kathleen Ernst Chair in Educational Entrepreneurship, Technology, and Innovation. Whatever else you want. And other duties as a design, yes. The LA Education Exchange is his brainchild, and I'm so grateful to him and for the team, and I know he will introduce the team. As you're well aware, things like this don't just happen, and Alan and his team have done, I think, a superb job in getting us to this point today. So without further ado, Alan and Sal Khan.
After you. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Commencement Week USC style. We had, I think about, Dean, what do we have, 19,000 folks? 60,000 friends and family. There's nothing greater than that feeling, the aspirational piece, which is, and Sal, as the Dean said, gave a commencement address to our master's students, and it was inspirational, so thank you, Sal, for that. Thanks for all coming here today. I should say something about Dean Gallagher, but again, for all of you, we know that USC has been in the news, and what I take most pride in is for this School of Education, making impact in a real, quantifiable way is something that no other school of ed in America is doing, the way she has been able to take research, teaching, and practice and make it relevant in powerful and profound ways. So thank you for all coming here today. And we do this to do the crucial work of ensuring growth and improvement for high quality public schools in LA. And by the way, no one is doing that better and more exemplified by GPS Now. GPS Now is here. Is Anna here? Hello, Anna and Isabel. They are the accelerant for this kind of discussion in LA, and this is the kind of conversations that we need to be having. So, as the Dean said, I'm Alan Arkatoff, Chair for Innovation and founder of Center Edge. We have a great team of folks here. I want to acknowledge Liz Fogel, who's the managing director of Center Edge. There is Liz. Who part of this stemmed from a conversation that I had with Liz when we were recruiting her. She had been a classroom teacher for a dozen years, and went and got her Ed Psych degree, and then became the director of education for the Walt Disney Companies. And I won't say, it wouldn't be right to call it Auschwitz. It was a hard place to work, though. And we said to her, you can laugh at that, folks. That was okay. But trying to come from that place to education. And one of the things that we had these morning conversations with great educators and great storytellers was being able to bridge those gaps, those in-between spaces, those twilight spaces. And what we constantly keep coming back to is that we don't have as many education problems as we have communication problems. So if we were thinking about communications and thinking about anybody who has transformed education and communications, it's Sal Khan. He's the single person most identified with using communications and technology to disrupt, transform, and improve teaching outcomes via personal learning. And I'm trusting that you're a little more than familiar with his work and his life. But what I will say, in addition to his extraordinary personal story, little things that all of us should aspire to, Time Magazine, 100 most influential people in the world. And in a world where we try and quantify things, Khan Academy, I think now 70 million registered users, and about 18 million folks a month. So I hope that when we have this discussion, you'll be thinking about his work as it relates to your work. And as I told Sal and Sujata as Chief of Staff, what we're trying to do here is use the power of Hollywood. We are not Buffalo. We are not St. Louis. We are LA. We are the epicenter of the imagination economy. And no one in the world has been able to cross that bridge between education and communications to improve teaching and learning's outcome more than Sal Khan. So let's give Sal a big thank you again. Hi, Sal.
Alan, thank you. I'll call you when I have my low self-esteem moments. That was very nice. Yes.
I am going to want to talk about benevolent aliens and your world and your views of the world. This is such an honor for me to be here with you. But let's just start with yesterday, because that is an aspirational moment. It is something that is still unique in terms of America. We send the best and brightest from around the world to come here because our higher education system is extraordinary, and we're very proud of it here at USC. Tell us your takeaways from yesterday, and what were the takeaways you were trying to leave for both the students, but also for the teachers and administrators?
You know, my takeaway from yesterday, it's always fun to kind of come to moments like this. And I give talks and I'm on panels and things, but I take commencements very seriously, because there's very few days in people's lives that you really remember, and you're likely to remember the rest of your life. And so in any way to be part of that is something I take pretty intensely. You know, what I was hoping to all the folks, and I was pretty serious about it, is it's very easy to talk cliches about education being a noble profession and the children of our future and all of that type of stuff. But there's all this conversation right now in the world about, and this was essentially the crux of my speech yesterday, around AI and automation and what's going to happen to folks. And when people point to the Industrial Revolution as a point in time when, well, it seems like things just kind of worked out, they're missing one of the biggest bets that society has ever made, and that was free mass public education, which was completely coincident with the Industrial Revolution in the 18th and 19th century. And I suspect if we didn't make that massive bet, and it was really a utopian bet 200 years ago, that we would not have had the middle class. We would have not had the 20th century that we did. We would have had some kind of like technocratic feudal situation. And I think as we go into this next, whatever we want to call it, third industrial revolution, we face similar challenges, and if anything, things like artificial intelligence are going to go even deeper into things that we've always thought were the domains of human beings. And so we have to think about how do we, some people well, it'll all work out. I don't think that's true, because it didn't just work out in the past. Some people will say, well, we need to do massive, whatever you want to call it, redistribution, safety nets. Maybe that's part of it, but the real essence is, I think we have to educate ourselves out of it. And the Industrial Revolution, it was okay to kind of have a labor pyramid. but we need to have an inverted labor pyramid where almost anyone can operate at the top in the creative class, be entrepreneurs, be explorers, researchers. I call it the Star Trek economy. We need to be able to create a world where we're all doing that.
So again, by the way, we're going to have this conversation for a little while, and then this is meant to be a very interactive discussion. We're going to have a couple mics, so be thinking about questions. We want this to be a dialogue, not a one-way conversation. The other thing about yesterday, Sal, as I was taken by was you talked about what makes us human. I think you said purpose. And I'm thinking about, again, you toggle these very complicated worlds of technology, content, education, and there has been what some call the technology deficit, the education technology deficit. Tell us how you've been able to toggle those spaces and where you've been from 10 years ago and even 5 years ago when you wrote a book. Where have things been, where are things now, and where do you see them going on that little balance, that teeter-totter of technology meets education?
Yeah, for me, and I think I'd like to think this is one of the things that have helped Khan Academy drive impact, is that I've never viewed it as really about technology. I've always viewed it as like, what's the end objective that we want to have? And the end objective in my mind is, how do you give as many people as much purpose as possible? Why are so many people, I remember when I was growing up, I would have friends that could beat me at chess, could pick up solve a puzzle faster than me, but we'd go to algebra class and I was doing all right, but my friend was all of a sudden struggling and was failing. And I think, I would guess many of us in the room were the lucky ones, where we were the ones that got pretty far through that system. And when you see people that are just as bright as you fail, you question, well, okay, maybe I just have a skill for this thing, or maybe something else is going on. And what my observation, and then later people have given me research studies from folks to back this up, is that my friends weren't falling out of the system because they were bright or because the subject matter was difficult. It was because they were accumulating these gaps. One of the things that we had to compromise in the Industrial Revolution was that in order to do it economically, education before the Industrial Revolution, you have a private tutor. Now only 5% of the population could get it, but it was really good. But with the Industrial Revolution, you have this, kind of a factory model where students have to move lockstep. And what's inevitable is that some students will be able to keep up, but there might be a quiz on exponents, and I get a 70%, you get an 80%, you get a 95%. Even though we've identified those gaps, the whole class has to move on to the next concept. And we have to build on those gaps. Maybe you're doing logarithms now, and those gaps keep accumulating, and at some point you hit a wall. And so, and that was always in the back of my mind. And then in the early days when I was working with my cousins, really it was just just kind of family project, I saw it again. A lot of my cousins, even some of them who were A or B students, they were convinced that they just didn't have a math brain. But the more I talked to them, and I was able to be their personal tutor, I had that luxury, I said, well, no, I didn't realize you just have this gap. You don't quite understand how to divide decimals right now, or you don't quite intuitively understand what a fraction really represents. And then when I was able to fix those little gaps, then that same student who thought, Nadia, my cousin that I started with, she was being placed in a remedial math class when she was 7th grade. Literally after 4 or 5 weeks, she was able to go into an advanced math class. And so when I saw that, I was like, maybe it's Nadia, but I really enjoyed that experience being able to work with her. So I worked with her younger brothers. Word gets around the family, free tutoring is happening, and I'm with 10, 15 cousins, and I saw it over and over. So, long answer.
In a closet, if I recall correctly.
It started in a guest bedroom in a condo we had, and then when we moved into where we live today, it was in a walk-in closet. It's a nice one though. It has a window, and I don't want to make people think it was extra hardship.
Which, by the way, is important when we think about production values. We want to talk about content and all these things. It didn't have to have great production values, right?
No, and this goes back to the same, to the previous question as well. It's all about the objective. I think so many times people get caught up and enamored with, and I said this yesterday too, they get enamored with the technology, or they get enamored with the production value of it, or they get enamored what they think will make it look good versus what will meet the need. And so I actually think it was really lucky that in the early days, if someone had showed up and kind of thrown a few $1 million on my front door and said, Sal, make some great education content in, back in 2007 or 2008, I think I would have fallen down the pitfall that a lot of education publishers do. They'll get a big committee of education experts. They'll kind of get together, and it's not going to be any one of their ethos. You're going to kind of reduce to the common denominator. Then you're going to get someone with a nice voice to read it who probably doesn't know the content. Then you're going to, get some fancy computer graphics, and then the thing that you produce will look very professional, have computer graphics and all that. But it'll sound like, the next step of photosynthesis is and it'll sound like your GPS device. And to a human being, and I know there's people in kind of the storytelling world here, we are extremely sensitive to tone, and we are extremely sensitive to reading what's in the mind of the person producing it. And if you know that person's just reading a script, if you know that person really doesn't care about what they're talking about, or really isn't even thinking about it as they're reading a script, you're going to completely disengage. So it was a blessing that in those early days, I didn't think anyone else was going to watch it except for Nadia and Arman and Sasha and my cousins. And so I was just talking to them. And I did, in the early days when I was tutoring them remotely, I was in Boston and then in Northern California, and they were in New Orleans. We were using a speakerphone, and then we found out some kind of digital virtual notepads where we could write stuff down and share it. And I was like, well, this was 2006 when I made the first video. I was thinking cell phone video cameras weren't that good. I didn't have a video camera. And I said, there's got to be something where you can just capture a screen of writing and capture a voice. And it turns out it was called screen capture. And that's what I used. And I think, inadvertently, it turned out to be the exact right modality. I didn't have to comb my hair or shave or anything. And a lot of people said it feels intimate. It feels like we're at the coffee table together and we're working on something.
So we know about your successes. Tell us about, because in the Silicon Valley world and Silicon Beach world of failing fast, tell us again, wrote the book 5-6 years ago, 10 years, which is a long time in education. We have in our room the best and brightest of public-private parochial schools. We have administrators, leadership from administrator union, teachers union. We have the leading charter organizations. We have the ecosystem here, meeting the Hollywood, the storytelling. But so often these spaces do not evolve, and we have lots of plans that don't get anywhere, or you look at them. So tell us where you have failed and where you think you need to change things. Because I think you're planning to now, if we break out the world into, if we're saying wholesale and retail is straight to the students, to the parents, to the teachers, but wholesale would be to the school districts. Tell us why you're evolving to adding that to your outreach efforts.
Yeah, well, I'll start with a mistake. There's tons of mistakes I could list. Some I'm too embarrassed to, but the ones that, I think some of what I just said about getting enamored with technology, I think I've done that several times. The early days of Khan Academy, before I made the first video, all Khan Academy was my original background was in software. I started writing these exercise generators for my cousins. And it was helpful, and I made tools so that I could see what they were doing and what were their gaps. But I was so enamored with this notion that software could generate an infinite number of questions, which was needed if you really wanted people to master concepts. And I remember in the very early days, he was actually my college roommate and one of the smartest guys I know. He ended up being our first president when Khan Academy started to get on everyone's radar, and I needed help to create a real organization. And he said, well, these automated generated questions are pretty good, but what about some of these more nuanced, multi-step, kind of higher depth of knowledge type of questions? And I was like, no, we'll figure it out. And it took me about 3 years to realize he was right. And if I had do-overs, I would have done that earlier. I think I would call it a mistake is, in the early days, I said exactly what I'm saying now, that it really should be about the curriculum flexing to the needs of the individual students. That would have been an ideal that wasn't possible 30 years ago, but now in theory with technology that is. But, and every educator intellectually agrees with that. As I said last night, the ideas of differentiated instruction are taught at ed schools. There's been things like, studies that have showed if you have a personal tutor that works in a mastery learning framework, the same student who's at the 50th percentile can be in the 80th and 90th percentile. And so I used to preach this, and I still do, I guess, but I think I was going too much too fast, because to actually implement it in a mainstream classroom, you have to really re-engineer a lot of things. You have to, kind of the traditional grade system goes out. You stop thinking in terms of hours, and right now even at universities, people literally think in credit hours. It's about how much time you're in a seat versus what you've learned. So I realized, and it took me frankly about 5-6 years to realize that was too much to ask. What's been good is over the last 2 or 3 years, we've been running a whole host of efficacy studies, some by us, some by third parties, ed schools, third-party researchers, and we're seeing that if students are even able to get 45 minutes a week of let's call it mastery learning, of individualized practice, where you can cater to their needs. And it isn't, a lot of people when they think technology and education, they're imagining this like Vulcan or Borg reality of these kids just on a computer and with a screen. But when it's done right, it shouldn't be that at all. It should be the kids, they're getting things that are catering to their needs, and if they need help, they have their peers. There's a lot more human interaction between the students than in a typical classroom, and the teacher is informed with where the students are. Hey, those kids are all right for the next 10 minutes, but these kids could use an intervention. Let me go and work on something deeper with them. Or all the kids kind of got this concept so far, we can move on, or I can do a simulation or a game with them. And so now that we're seeing that even 45 minutes, most of the studies are pointing to these kids are going 20 to 30% faster, which was even surprised me how dramatic it's been. Now when we're going to districts and teachers, and we've always had, there's 250,000 teachers who are using Khan Academy in some way, but it's been very grassroots and kind of one-offs. And we're now talking to districts and large districts. We've always had smaller districts that have been willing to work with us. In fact, I just got here from Las Vegas yesterday, and Las Vegas, there'll be something in the news in the next month. 5th largest district in America is going to do something very big with about 150,000 kids. But when we talk to them and we say, hey, this feels like 45 minutes a week is a doable thing, you don't have to upend your entire school model, your curriculum, et cetera, they say yes, but we need better support, we need better training, we need integration with our student information systems, rostering, all of these kind of, I guess you could call them enterprise, you call it wholesale, that we as a small nonprofit, I mean our budget's the budget of a large high school, have kind of shied away from. Yeah. But now we think we're at the phase of our organization where we do need to, I tell my team all the time that phase 1 of Khan Academy was me in a walk-in closet trying to prove that this is a legitimate thing. Phase 2 was roughly the last 8-9 years where we're showing that this thing can scale, it can move the dial, it can have efficacy. And phase 3 is we can't shy away from literally trying to move the dial for states and for nations. And the only way that we can do that is through, and the only way we can ensure we're reaching all the kids is through districts.
So help us think through, and you've picked, again, love that Sal and Khan Academy have tried to hold themselves accountable. So a few years ago, you decided to do a partnership with the College Board and look at test prep and SAT and others. Tell us about, for the underserved communities, for those that most need it, tell us about the impact and good and bad in terms of what you've learned from that.
Yeah, so about, I guess it's 4 or 5 years ago now, David Coleman, at the time he was the new president of the College Board, the folks who make the SAT and AP and all other stuff like that, they reached out to us and they said, look, we are about to revamp the SAT, make it more aligned with, frankly, with the Common Core and what kids actually learn. When we took the SAT, it was kind of viewed a little bit more as like a IQ test or something like that. And he says the other thing we want to do, and it's very forward thinking on his part, he's like, the testing bodies have always kind of ignored the test prep industry as much as they didn't like it. And so he said, we've been looking at what Khan Academy does, and I had some early kind of test prep exercises and videos up there, and what they said was they really appreciated that our version of test prep was not, this is how you game the test. Our version of test prep is, this is how you fill in your gaps so that you're more ready for college. And that'll just be evidenced on whatever test you take. And so David said, what if we were to partner and create the world's best test prep that happened to be free? And we're like, yeah, this is completely aligned with our mission. And so actually now College Board provided us the resources, and they continue to provide us the resources to do that. And we launched about 3 years ago, and it's used more than all of paid test prep combined. It's I think it's now 60% of all students who take the SAT, this is their primary tool. And then this happened somewhat organically, and I don't know whose idea it was, whether it was the College Board or ours. there's a thing called the PSAT, which actually even more students take. 70% of American kids take the PSAT and MSQT. And when all of us took it, it was just this random test that you took in 10th or 11th grade. And if you did well, you get letters from universities and things. But now when you take it, and this is true for the last 2 years, when students get their scores, they also say, hey, why don't you sync this with Khan Academy? They have to give permission. But if they do, then the Khan Academy software has access to every item that you got wrong or right. And then it can adapt to the needs of the student to do weak point training, to essentially, once again, do personalized learning. So it acts as really the world's first and largest massively scaled personalized learning diagnostic is now the PSAT. And what's really exciting about that is that we can now track these kids longitudinally over, we're talking hundreds of thousands of kids every year, from the PSAT over roughly 18 months, 24 months into the SAT. And this is also, once a year, and both organizations are very sensitive about data, and we want to only use it to serve the needs of students. But our data analytics team and their data analytics team gets together once a year, and we're able to slice and dice it by demographics and all this. And one of the fears of both myself and David Coleman in the early days was, well, this is an online thing. Does everyone have equal access to something that is online? And the worst case is we're somehow making the situation worse. To help prevent that, we did try to make sure we're working with a lot of large urban school districts, boys and girls clubs, et cetera, et cetera. But what's been heartening when we look at the data, it is first of all being used by everyone. So it's not like the rich kids are saying, oh, I'm getting something better for money. It's being used by them, but it is being used disproportionately by African American and Latino kids, and it is being used disproportionately by kids at lower socioeconomic.
So let's get started. We're going to start interspersing questions. So get ready. And mics, we have 2 mics. So if you want to raise your hands, and I'm just going to ask a question, then we'll go to some questions and go back and forth. But again, we have a lot of folks here from the entertainment industry, and I'm curious. At the end of the day, what works? So I said something to Sujata yesterday in terms of, I said, there are a lot of folks that want to be Sal Khans out there. What is so special about Khan Academy and what you did? I mean, there are other folks that have tried to do these things. Give us an understanding in terms of the quality of the content, the production, the messaging, the technology, for Hollywood as they think about how to have impact. What has worked and what hasn't, and why are there 1,000 Sal Khans out there? We just don't know about them?
I mean, to a large degree, and I'm guessing there's 10,000, or there could be, I don't know. I think there's a couple of things. I think there are, I wasn't the first person on YouTube to make educational content, et cetera, et cetera. I think maybe one of the things that why it resonated with folks, I'm not joking, the fact that it was for these cousins and saying words like love and stuff, that's another cliche, but it is true that even though it feels like online video feels like an impersonal medium if it's done well, and I think people who are in storytellers as for the profession know it is, if the best way to sound like you care about someone is to actually care about them. And so I do tell, and I also, we're very sensitive at Khan Academy that we got on people's radars around me making videos for family, but most of our resources are not on that. We're writing software, we're doing data analytics, we're integrating with these various partners. But what I tell all of our team members is, when you're doing it, whatever you're doing, especially if you're doing something like a video, but whatever you're doing, you're writing an exercise, you're conducting research, you're writing software, if you don't have passion for what you're about to do, somehow it'll be lost to the user. Somehow, so have that, and especially if you're teaching. I would say the other things, there's folks who I think are amazing. I think people, especially in maybe the YouTube world, there's almost a tension between being an entertainer and being an educator. And so I think there's a lot of edutainment out there. And actually they serve a great purpose because some of it's really entertaining and they get you excited about something and they're witty. But for us at Khan Academy, it has always been, hey, how can we really give people the core, the essence of ideas first? And so when we first got on people's radar in 2007, 2008, there was a path. And frankly, there were VCs who wanted to fund a path of us becoming kind of a media, kind of a edutainment media type channel. And that would have been cool, and I think that would have had a lot of impact too. But for me, it was, I've always, for those of you who were at my talk yesterday, I've always been inspired by certain aspects of science fiction. And my favorite book or series of books is Isaac Asimov's Foundation series. And I first read it when I was in 7th grade. And in that, the protagonist, his name is Harry Seldon. It's 30,000 years in the future. And humanity has colonized the galaxy. And he's a kind of an economist, educator, mathematician. And he's able to see that with his mathematics that the galactic empire is about to enter into a 10,000-year dark ages. And so he decides to do something about it. And so he creates a foundation with all of the galaxy's knowledge at the edge of the empire in order to, instead of having a 10,000-year dark age, to have a 1,000-year dark age. So stop 9,000 years of ignorance, of wars, of famine. And I remember when I was in 7th grade and I read that, I was like, that's inspiring. And like, how come people don't think that way? And then, when I'm, at this point I was probably about 30, 31, and I was just like, yeah, people, because I was literally, I was an analyst at a hedge fund. I knew people didn't think that way. People didn't really think beyond the next quarter, or definitely not beyond the next year. And so when this little project with my family started to become something, my science fiction, slightly delusional part of me said, what if this could be like the foundation? What if this could be like, this thing, this institution that we can create for the world that could reach billions of people, this institution that could help educators around the world get to that kind of that gold standard of really meeting the students where they are and giving access to anyone on the planet. And it was delusional. I mean, I was a guy who, hadn't combed his hair in a walk-in closet. But that's, I think that, and now when I say it with our team and with our stakeholders, it feels a little less delusional. And I think that, to some degree, has helped us stay aspirational and hopefully, keep having impact.
Okay. Questions from the audience? Randy?
So doesn't work. So you focused on...
It is working.
It is working.
Yeah.
Okay. You focused on how students learn. What are your thoughts on what students need to learn and changing the outcomes of education, especially in light of how we are today connected to devices that provide us information whenever we want it? And so, what would the outcome of the education be in the future to succeed in life?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And we literally have this debate inside Khan Academy all the time. As you can imagine, we attract very idealistic people to our team. And what I tell them is that we have to be relevant to the system as it is today. But I think what you're touching on is a very important point. For those of you who don't know, this idea of what, that students should learn algebra in 9th grade and algebra or geometry in 10th grade and chemistry in 10th or 11th grade and all of these courses, English 1, 2, 3, 4. This was put in motion in 1890 by 10 university presidents. And they literally wrote it down that this is what you should know before you show up at Harvard or wherever. And that was before we had the internet, before we knew about DNA, before we had the Federal Reserve. I mean, our world has transformed dramatically, but that decision by 10 19th century men is what has essentially defined the global education system in terms of what we learn for over the past, we're talking almost 130 years now. So I think there's a huge opportunity for us to rethink that. Some of those things I think they were right.
We're still using an agrarian calendar.
We're still using and the architecture of a school and the fact that kids go home at 3, even though we don't have families where, I actually think that's one of the biggest sources of inequity, what happens after school and what happens over the summer. But yeah, so I think in terms of what they should learn, I think, I think I can uniquely criticize calculus because I love calculus and I teach calculus. But if I had to pick between calculus and statistics, I would say statistics is a much more relevant thing, especially in our modern democracy where people are throwing stats at you and they're misleading and they're whatever else, to be able to get to the root of issues. I think, a notion of financial literacy. It sounds very pragmatic, but I remember 10 years ago when the financial crisis was happening and we're all members of a democracy and we're trying to understand what illiquidity is versus insolvency and what's a mortgage-backed security. If you're voting on these issues, you have to have some idea of what's happening. And actually, that was the first way that Khan Academy got on folks' radars. I had made a bunch of videos about mortgage-backed securities. And Actually, there was a letter I got from someone, I won't say which bank, but it was on the video on mortgage-backed securities, and he wrote, "I finally know what I now do for a living." So it was a little, but anyway, one of the things that I try to think through is, and I view this as part of our mission and vision is, I've been having a lot of conversations with employers lately, and big employers, people who employ hundreds of thousands of people, and they're saying that one, they want to diversify the pool that gets in. I think right now a lot of employers are looking at the same signals. They're looking at degrees from, roughly 100 universities that they recognize. We talked about this yesterday. There's, I think, another like 2,000 universities or three, that kids they're getting in, they're getting into debt. They're going to these things. They're taking time off. There's an opportunity cost, but then they're not getting the signal or necessarily even the skills that employers are able to fully recognize. And so I would like to explore ways, and I don't think this is instead of college. I think this is just, it could be both or it could be one or the other depending on people's needs, where you are able to get those skills. And I don't think, we need to kind of liberate ourselves from a time-bound reality. I mean, I'll say this, and I'll say this at any college, this notion that there's something magical about 4 years. Whether you're going to be a computer scientist or an art history major or a nurse, it's always 4 years, which kind of tells you that people just kind of said, let's have 4 years and let's fill it up.
And seat time goes back.
And seat time, exactly.
K-12.
Exactly.
Huge opportunities, don't you think, when you think about the youngest? We have first 5 represented here in terms of the youngest, and to be able to change that playing field early, right? In terms of...
Yeah, I mean, that's another, Alan was referring to this notion of benevolent aliens earlier, and I'll throw,
I have all sorts of things I'm not supposed to talk about benevolent aliens.
I said I'm comfortable with that.
He was a guitar player. He would sing. There was all sorts of sides, but go ahead. It's like, now I'm in trouble. Okay.
No, the reason why you got me thinking about benevolent aliens is when you talk about early learning is, I have a whole theory, and I tell the Khan Academy team, is that there's been so many things in my life that have kind of felt more than just random serendipity, that feel like, it almost feels like an intervention that made me take the right path, that I tell people that it almost feels like, there's benevolent aliens out there, and they're trying to use Khan Academy as a delivery mechanism to prepare humanity for first contact. And I'll give you, since you talk about early learning, I'll give you an example of one of those interventions that the aliens made. And we, in our early days of our...
People are going on Twitter right now.
Yeah.
This is like...
No, I'm embracing it now. I mean, if they're there, I know I'm with you. And some of you might be them. So our mission, free world-class education for anyone, anywhere, it's very clear that early learning is where you can get a lot of impact and a lot of leverage before those gaps form, before those self-perceptions really stick with people. And we had people in the early days, when are we going to work on early learning? I was like, I would love to, but I don't have the expertise. That's not where I have strength. And I used to, my kids, my oldest child, I have 3, my oldest is 10, so he kind of grew up right as iPhones and iPads, like we all discovered that, wow, 18-month-old kids can operate a tablet device. That happened around 2008, 2009, and it was a big aha for all of us. And I remember there was this company, and they had a kind of a genesis story similar to Khan Academy. It was these 2 parents in Silicon Valley that kind of quit their day job to make apps for their kids that they then became. So they made the famous Wheels on the Bus app and all of these early and they're called Duck Duck Moose. And they're real quirky. They're these musicians, and so they play all the music and they sing all the songs. They're this kind of really kind of polymathic family. And I remember telling my team around 6 or 7 years ago when they were saying, when are we going to do early math? I was like, well, or early learning, not just early math. I said, if we ever do it, it's got to be as good as Duck Duck Moose. Because they're hitting the sweet spot on quirky, on entertaining, but actually educational. And then about 3 years ago, I say, hey, the team from this company called Duck Duck Moose wants to meet. And I was like, oh yeah, I know all about them. So they come over and they start giving this big presentation about what they're doing and their reach and their apps and efficacy studies. And I'm like, no, look, I know all about y'all. I showed them my phone. I had all like 15 of their apps downloaded for my kids. I love what you're doing. I'm kind of a fanboy of what, like, why are you here? And then they said, we want to donate our company to Khan Academy. And I was like, what does this mean? Because they're actually, they were venture backed by some of the top VCs in the country. And they said, yeah, we're VC backed. We actually have acquisition offers, and fairly large acquisition offers for their team. And this is the benevolent aliens right now at work. this is the founding team. They said, we talked over it with our team. They were about a 15-person team. We and our team and our VCs, this is why I know Benevolent Aliens are involved, all three agree that a bigger legacy for what our work is in the nonprofit sector. Versus, so that literally all of these people, even VCs who some agree have a fiduciary to maximize their return, wrote off the investment, and we bought them for $1. And they could have been sold for probably about 20 or 30 million someplace else. And so they came on, and we found funders to help support it. We're still looking for more because there's a bit of a gap, but the Omidyar Network and Winsong Trust. And we said, what if we could create one app that's holistic across math, reading, writing, social emotional learning? And that's what we've been working with. It launched last summer. It's growing exponentially. Look up Khan Academy Kids. And it's the same thing. It adapts to where a student is. It's entertaining. The videos stop, and then the kids have to interact with it. And our ideal use case, it's something that kids can do beside a sibling or in the lap of a loved one. But 40% of the users are in schools now. We started working with the Head Start nationally, so we're excited about that.
I love that, and that's a good reminder that there's so much clutter out there. You talk to teachers, you talk to administrators, you talk to students, too much, and the Amadeus, too many notes. But the reality is there's a lot of good stuff, but can you leverage it? Can you, like with that story, bring it to Khan Academy, because there's just so much room, right, in terms of being able to break through the clutter. Yes?
So you said something earlier about schools closing at 3. If you were king of the world, what would the school day look like?
Yeah, so I wrote a lot about this in my book, and so the simple answer is what I would make it would be roughly full year, full day. And some people kind of roll their eyes, but that doesn't mean it has to be this kind of you sit passively, fingers on your lips the whole day. But you get more time and space to do some more exploration, to do, I'm a big fan of peer-to-peer learning too, where the students start taking responsibility over each other's, which is the best way of, one, learning the material and building a lot of the empathetic, social, emotional. So we started a lab school under our office to prove some of this stuff out. And I have to say, and I knew that it's one thing to say it in theory, but to actually implement it in practice gets a lot messier. So it's a separate entity from Khan Academy, but it's a related one. And I'm on the board, but I'm not on the day-to-day. But our school that we started, it's literally in the same building, and my kids go to, it is a full year, full day. And what you see is we do leverage technology, but anyone who has stereotypes about technology use, I say, come over to this school. You're not going to see a more collaborative group of kids who are more invested in each other's shared future. Our new head of school, Rachel Skiffer, she was essentially the number 2 at Phillips Andover before. And when she came to the school, the number one thing that blew her mind is how collaborative the kids were. That they don't feel like they have to compete against each other. They don't feel that the teachers are kind of gatekeepers. They see everyone as kind of one team to help them kind of prepare for the world. Other things that we're trying to do beyond full year, full day is, we think that the transcript of the future should look very different. It should be a combination of your competencies, your skill competencies, your academic competencies. It should be some narrative, subjective assessment from your peers and your faculty. And it should be your portfolio of the work that you've created. And frankly, I actually think that's already the credential of today. It's just we don't fully realize it. That's what we're trying to do, and then we want to kind of open source the school as much as possible. But yeah, full year, full day, I think would be a major benefit.
The stunning part of all this is so much of this stuff has already been out there, right? We're not having to reinvent the wheel. Competency-based learning has been around. Peer-to-peer learning, we know teacher to teacher, parent to parent, student to student, so important, but these tools are there. I see Ernie Wilson, who's our former Dean of Annenberg and heads up the third space and thinks about soft skills. Ernie?
2 quick questions. One is, we chatted a little bit about this. How would you right the balance between providing the tools to learn adaptability, cultural competence online? Second question, since we're talking about media and Hollywood here, have you ever had your life put in a biopic for Hollywood? But one of the things that came up, and do you have an agent?
Wow. We've got folks in the room here.
One of the things that came up is we need a face to sort of describe these competencies and a story and a narrative. So that's sort of semi-serious question. Have you ever thought about doing a video, some kind of content about content?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know what to make of the second part. I guess we could see if Cal Penn's available. That would be an improvement from the reality. But on the former, so I think on the social emotional side of things, I think there's a couple of things. I think there's a few things that we might be able to do in the types of platforms we have. We have experimented with actually pretty good success. You know, y'all, I'm sure this room heard of things like growth mindset and growth mindset interventions. And if you let someone know that your brain is like a muscle, the more you use it, the stronger it gets. Just that knowledge makes someone more likely to persevere, more likely willing to step out of their comfort zone, which is a strong correlate with success. So we've done stuff and we've run experiments where we put some of those growth mindset interventions as people are doing items on our practice items, and we do see that it increases higher engagement. And so as we design the game mechanics on our site to get people more motivated, we're constantly looking at those types of things. My gut sense is in the near term, the biggest levers are there ways that we can make systems around the technology that when you're with people in a room, you can leverage that. So what are the systems for peer-to-peer learning? What are the systems for giving feedback to your peers and also taking feedback from your peers? What are the systems for evaluating each other's work? I think some of that will really start to build. I point out is in a traditional academic model, there's very little emphasis on it explicitly. I mean, if you look at the Common Core standards, there's no standards on that, or the next generation science standards or anything. It's very much about skill competency. And so, for example, I don't want to plug our lab school too much because there's a lot of stuff we're working on there that isn't perfect yet. But we literally say some of these expectations and we give rubrics to the kids, and then they evaluate each other on these rubrics that are based on empathy, communication, et cetera, et cetera. And you'd be surprised, kids much younger than most people would guess are capable of introspecting on these types of things if you allow them to. We were chatting just now a little while ago. I think ways that it could scale is I am fascinated by the idea of being able to have peer-to-peer tutoring virtually as well and connect with people as well. I just got contacted by a nonprofit that's trying to connect classrooms in that way. I don't know if anyone remembers the old Cisco commercials where they used to have these classrooms on different parts of the planet, and they'd be, that was science fiction when they made those ads, but there's no reason why that can't happen today. And so I think that in terms of global empathy, you get a classroom in Los Angeles, if you can figure out the time zones and all of that, you get it with a classroom in Hong Kong or whatever, or in Africa or in Latin America. So I think there's stuff like that. But at the end of the day, it's how do you capture where someone is? And we were talking about, part of this credential of the future, and I've talked to a lot of employers about this, because I said, what evidence would I have to give to you so that a student will get past the resume screen? What evidence do I have to get you so they get to around 2? And what if you could create a really rich persona, essentially create the tool so anyone can tell their story very richly, and then maybe there's some peer review. And so that when you see someone, right now you see someone's resume or LinkedIn, it's very one-dimensional. It's just text. You don't really know who they are. But what if you knew what they did, you knew some of their competencies, but you also got them answering questions, and you got them showcasing some of their work and showcasing some of their personality. I think when you have the endpoint is clear that you need to build those muscles, then oftentimes the system works to build them better. So that's my preliminary guesses.
So I want to be respectful. It's a Mother's Day weekend, and we promised everyone they would be out of here at 1:30. As we close this discussion, by the way, this is the beginning of a series of discussions. Sal has been very gracious, and we're going to try and think through how to thread this discussion in terms of meaningful, specific ways that we can implement some of these things. Talk to us about things that you would like. One thing from yesterday's commencement, after you gave the commencement speech, in terms of something that you wanted to stick for those students, and then for the educators, and then one thing to stick for Hollywood and the entertainment community. And I just think about, we're a center of engagement, so I'm proud of that. But we also know that engagement has its negatives, right? We have a show on Netflix that we can actually quantify, moved suicide rates up 30% in 1 month. Oh my God. So when we use words like engagement, it is always just good. In this complicated world order of education ecosystem and entertainment ecosystems, what are one or two last things you'd like us to stick with us from the world of Sal?
Well, I would say is, appreciate where we are in time and history. I think it's very easy to kind of take it for granted and you just get used to the day-to-day. It's easy to get cynical, et cetera, et cetera. But we literally are, like, I think, if humanity ever does colonize the galaxy, they will look at this point in time, plus or minus a few decades, as kind of the time that humanity woke up, kind of up-leveled as a civilization. We have some really big challenges, which are both opportunities, the internet and the artificial intelligence and then this and that. But I think a lot of the same dynamics are going to allow us to rethink humanity in ways that would have seemed like science fiction. I wrote a piece a while ago called, I didn't come up with the title, but I always have enjoyed looking at, the title was From Economics to Trekonomics, and I watched some science fiction, if you haven't noticed. But I always did like looking at Star Trek from an economics point of view. Because economics is all the study of how do you allocate resources that are scarce. And Star Trek, things are not seemingly scarce. There's a replicator if you need a cup of coffee. There's the resources there. And in that world, everyone is a researcher, a teacher, an explorer, an artist. And you say, well, that's pretty amazing. And why shouldn't that be the case if we are no longer in a scarcity world? And in a lot of ways, we're getting faster to that Star Trek reality technologically than Gene Roddenberry imagined. iPhone's more impressive than a tricorder. Alexa can already replicate the ship's computers in eerie ways. But it doesn't feel like our social fabric is keeping up at the same pace. And I view this as kind of the epicenter, schools of education, of trying to understand how do we prepare humanity for being able to navigate this the right way. Because if we do, I think it's the Star Trek reality or better in 100 years. And if we don't, it's more like Mad Max or WALL-E or something like that.
Are we talking Captain Kirk or Jean-Luc Picard?
Oh, for me? I thought Captain Kirk's a little too dramatic. But.
So, ladies and gentlemen,
Can I
distinguished
jump in real
friends,
quick with one last question?
We got to get it going. I'm sorry. Want to thank our Captain Kirk here for education, who has really set the beacon in terms of for educators, for storytellers about how to transform education and cross these twilight areas. And we are so appreciative of Sal being here and continuing this discussion. Let's hear it for Sal Khan.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.